Change the game. Charlie Brown by Mechanical Tinkerer. Summary. Charlie Brown's used to the state of things, good or bad, but when life throws him a curveball, or three, he finds himself even more paralyzed with indecision than usual. Maybe something good can come out of it all, though, if he can muster up the courage. There were many constants in Charlie Brown's life. He couldn't keep a kite in the air. His toast came out burnt. Lucy pulled away the football. It was the way things were meant to be. Nothing would ever change one or weigh the other. The world didn't care what he thought. It came as a surprise then, when the little red-haired girl stopped coming to school. This wasn't too alarming. It was still flu season after all. She must have caught it. Charlie had many things to worry about as it was, so it quickly fell to the back of his mind. The itch grew worse as days turned into weeks. The little red-haired girl still wasn't at her desk, or on the playground, or anywhere else for that matter. Charlie began to assume the worst. Something had happened, something worse than the flu. Not knowing what only tormented him, there was an insultingly easy solution to this dilemma: asking someone about it. But he didn't. How could he? It was too embarrassing. He'd be laughed at for being so ignorant. Every day at the end of class, Charlie would watch as his classmates poured out the door, just to see if he was making a mountain out of a molehill. It wouldn't be the first time. Again, she wasn't among the crowd. Charlie trailed behind the mass towards the bus stop. It was late, as usual. Charlie often wondered if it would arrive on time if he didn't happen to take it home. "I can't believe you, Charlie Brown." Charlie jumped as Linus approached him with a scowl. Nothing came to mind that could have triggered this bad temper. Playing it safe, Charlie opted for de-escalation. I know. I'm selfish." He shrugged helplessly. "I should walk and spare the rest of you." That must have been the wrong thing to say, because Linus's glare only intensified. "You have no idea, do you?" "Have no idea of what?" Charlie all but begged. "You don't." Linus's voice rose to a shout. Heads turned towards them, though Linus failed to notice this. "You don't even know. I don't believe it. That little red-haired girl you say you like so much, you're never going to see her again. She's gone." Charlie stared agape as Linus continued. "She's moved out of state, Charlie Brown. In January. Do you know what month it is now? February?" Every student within 20 feet now looked on in awe at the very one-sided clash. They glanced at the now sweating Charlie to see if he'd fire back. He didn't, of course. "Did you ever care about her at all?" Linus pointed accusingly. "Did you? You didn't even try to find out where she went. You just stood around. That's all you ever do. You stand around thinking about maybe someday doing something. You drive everyone crazy, Charlie Brown. I'm so angry I could scream." "I am screaming." Charlie hardly managed to sidestep out of the way before Linus barged through the crowd, stomping home down the sidewalk. Now everyone's attention focused solely on Charlie. Nobody said anything. They just gave him the same pitying look. Only at that moment did the bus sidle up, its engine clinging on for dear life. It took a couple honks to jostle the students into coming aboard. Charlie remained frozen, even after the bus left without him. Charlie Brown's critics, of which there were many, often accused him of having the lights off in his head. Only his closest friends knew that in truth, he was always turning something over. Linus's tirade gave him a lot to chew on, or rather, it gnawed on him. It didn't matter when Linus apologized, saying he didn't mean any of it. It was the worst when he should have been asleep. He tossed and turned from one side of the bed to the other, hour after hour. Did he care? Someone had permanently exited his life, and virtually nothing had changed. He never said hello. He never said goodbye. It was already growing difficult to remember what she looked like beyond her signature hair. "How can you love someone who never knew you existed?" he mumbled. An inkling of an answer only came to him when he drifted off into an uneasy slumber. All the introspection did little to comfort him. If anything, it only left him more confused and disoriented than before. It was a mercy when the school year finally ended, making way for baseball season. On the day of the first scheduled game, he set out for the field early. tossing and catching the ball in his glove. "We're going to win," he told himself. "I'm sure of it." Anyone else, even his teammates, would have called this misplaced confidence, but baseball was something Charlie actually understood. Selwyn. He did not, however, understand the white sign planted next to the curb. "Keep off." "What's this?" Linus ran up to him then, panting. Apparently he'd been looking for him to let him down easy. Somehow, he always found out things before Charlie did. Charlie listened as Linus explained why the vacant lot before them was no longer their baseball field. "Maybe we could play our games at the schoolyard," Charlie said, trying to be hopeful. Linus shook his head. "No one's allowed on the playground after school is out. What about the city park?" "Only if we pay $20 apiece and join the league." Charlie gulped. He doubted the rest of the team would fork it over, even if they had it. Come to think of it, he wasn't sure if Snoopy had money at all. What happened to fun? Our insurance doesn't cover it," said Linus solemnly. He took a step back from the sign like it was about to bite him. "I wonder what the rest of our team will say when they find out we have no place to play." It only set in then what was happening. Charlie heaved a long, suffering sigh. Some of them won't even know the difference. With no other options, he bid Linus farewell and dragged his feet back home. Charlie resisted the impulse to toss his cap and glove in the trash. They'd been through so much together. Every summer for as long as he could remember. Not this summer, it would seem. Or anyone after. But Charlie didn't want to just sit in front of the television until school started up again. He had to do something. Rummaging through the closet, turned up an old golf ball his dad had tossed in there years ago. Yes, this would do. Marie, ignoring Sally wanting to know what in the world he was doing, Charlie went out to the front porch and started bouncing the golf ball against the steps. If he closed his eyes, he was back on the field. He was even making successful plays. Before the ball came flying back and knocked him off his feet. "Even my imagination is against me," Charlie muttered. He got right back up and dusted himself off, oblivious to a bespectacled girl approaching his house. She stopped and observed him for a few minutes before speaking up. "What are you doing, Charles?" "Practicing," he said, as if that were self-evident. "I thought you were having a game today." Marcie was right to be confused. If it were up to him, Charlie would never miss a game, no matter how much the outcome humiliated him. "Not anymore. We can't play on the lot we use." He turned and resumed his throws. Marcie kept her eye on the ball in case it happened to aim fire at her. "The owner's afraid of us getting hurt because he'd be liable. Our umpire wasn't sanctioned, and our players' bench hadn't been approved by the design review committee." As he grumbled, he actually managed to catch the ball in his glove. Marcie didn't pretend to understand at half of what he was saying. "Anywhere else won't allow us or costs money. We're not allowed to do anything that might be fun. So this is your substitute, Charles. It's good for your reflexes." Charlie adjusted his cap, smiling as he reared up for another shot. "It's the last of the ninth. Bases are loaded. The count is 3-2. AC Brown delivers." He pitched with everything he had. The ball rebounded and hit him in the face. Marcie covered her eyes as he flew back onto the lawn. Peeking through her fingers, she saw Charlie lying flat on the ground, sustaining nothing more than a shattered ego. She walked over and bent over him. They took away your field, and you're not doing anything about it." Charlie blinked up at her. She almost sounded upset. He'd already made it obvious there wasn't anything he could do. No adult would give him his field back, because he asked them to, and they certainly wouldn't listen to Snoopy dressed as an attorney either. Marcie was smart. She'd surely understand if he just explained it the right way. But her expectant gaze rendered him unable to say anything beyond flustered stammering. He rose and poked his head into a bush to see if the ball had landed in it. Marcie sensed that she was being ignored. "Is this how you're fighting back? By bouncing that stupid golf ball against those stupid steps?" Charlie swung around and threw his hands up. "What do you expect me to do?" His stomach dropped the moment the last word left his mouth. Marcie frowned as she plugged her ears. She didn't handle sudden loud noises very well. "Don't scream, Charles," she said gravely. It's embarrassing. Charlie couldn't bear to look her in the face. He stared down at the grass. It was already yellowing in certain spots. I find it difficult to believe that someone I am very fond of could be acting this way. It took a second for it to hit his brain. It took another to internalize it. "You're fond of me?" he squeaked, as if he'd been told the sky was actually green. "Kiss her, you blockhead!" came a shout from the upstairs window. Neither of them acknowledged it. "I've always been fond of you, Charles," Marcie said, wringing her hands. "I think you're the nicest person I've ever known. I hate to see you suffer all the time." She took a step closer and kissed him on the cheek. Without missing a beat, she added, "I know you could never love someone like me who has glasses, so I'll just leave you alone." Charlie's heart descended into the earth. He stood wide-eyed on his lawn as Marcie shuffled off down the street. The pitter-patter of shoes on the steps preceded Sally barging out the front door. "You are so useless!" She shook him in the vain hope it'd get him to do something. "What are you doing just standing here? Go after her!" Charlie took off his cap and twisted it, staring in the direction Marcie had left in. She was still visible on the horizon. Without thinking, he threw his cap into a yellow patch, the glove following after it. He trudged to the curb and went in the opposite direction. His brain was too mushy to comprehend Sally's shouting after him. Marcie burned with shame on her long trek back to her street. She wished she hadn't come over. All she wanted was to welcome the summer and her drastic increase in free time by paying Charles a visit. She and Charles didn't get to see each other as often for most of the year, what with them going to different schools. Marcie was at the age when she should be able to walk by herself, yet she preferred not to when possible. It was all too easy to imagine being watched through every window, or worse, bumping into a swarm of people that were all annoyingly curious about her existence. She'd been lucky enough not to today, but she hadn't bargained for Charles to be in the middle of a crisis. In hindsight, she should have accounted for that. He always had something weighing on him. She wanted to drag him out of his rut, to let him know someone cared. But her and her big mouth had to ruin it. A shaky breath escaped. She was closer to being overwhelmed than her countenance would let on. She had a place in mind to unwind, but she had to make a stop first. Noting the signs at the corner, she took a right towards her school. Peppermint Patty had landed herself in summer classes, just as Marcie had recurrently warned her. Yet she was still indignant when given the news. They'd agreed to meet up during Patty's lunch period so she wouldn't crack up. As Marcie expected, Patty sat against the chain-link fence, tugging at something. You shouldn't pick at the grass, sir," Marcie intoned. Patty dropped her bundle and shot up like she'd been caught in the cookie jar. "What do you know? You made it!" She grabbed the fence and stuck her nose up against it. "How's the outside? Am I missing anything?" Marcie leaned into the fence from her side. "Nothing worth talking about, sir." Patty cast a suspicious glance her way, but surprisingly didn't pry. Maybe she wouldn't have to talk about it. "Oh, I get it." Patty was smirking now. You went to see Chuck, didn't you?" Marcie somehow kept a straight face. "Don't embarrass me, sir. It was strictly a courtesy call." "Right." Patty had no idea what that meant, and for once Marcie wasn't going to give her the definition. "So how's old Chuck doing then, huh? He got crushed into the dirt today, didn't he?" "If you want to know the truth, sir, he's not doing so well. They can't play on their baseball field anymore, and he's not doing anything about it. He's not fighting back. He's just bouncing a ball against the steps." Patty hummed in thought. Marcie hoped it wasn't because she had genuine interest in the idea. "Chuck got his field taken away? Wow, guess he lost his team too." Patty shrugged carelessly. "Well, the way they played, it wasn't much fun for them anyway." Marcie rolled her eyes beneath her glasses. "You're missing the point, sir. The ball keeps ricocheting off the steps and hitting him." You worry too much. Chuck can't pitch to save his life, sure, but he can still handle a few punches. Any player needs tough skin. In that case, Marcie's skin was paper mache. She didn't see the appeal of risking injury, or, as Peppermint Patty so eloquently put it, crushed into the dirt, for the sake of winning a stupid ball game. It bothered Marcie that Charles put up with it so much. If she didn't know any better, she'd assume he was punishing himself. Patty shaking the fence startled her out of her thoughts. Is that it? Come on. You're holding on to something. I'll try not to laugh. No promises, though. Truthfully, her laughing was the best outcome Marcie anticipated. Patty liked Charles, too. Or at least Marcie was fairly certain that she did. Patty would get very defensive whenever Marcie brought it up. So, Peppermint Patty was nothing if not persistent. She wasn't going to let this go unless she caved in. Marcie tried to calculate the least mortifying string of words to articulate it. I made a total fool of myself, sir, she said slowly. He made me so mad. And then he got mad. One thing led to another, and I told him I liked him. Patty blinked, and I kissed him on the cheek. Marcie added for good measure. I think I frightened him, sir. She braced for the inevitable storm, but Patty remained stupefied. Who are you? And what have you done with Marcie? I'm right here. She let herself smile, as Patty kept on staring at her. That was a joke, sir. You're weird, Marcie. Patty tried to pat her on the shoulder despite the fence between them. Don't sweat it, though. Chuck doesn't get that sort of thing. He'll forget about it by tomorrow. Before Marcie could beg to differ, the bell rang in the distance. Patty stretched as she unlatched herself from the fence. My cell awaits, I guess. She snapped her fingers. I know what'll cheer you up. I'll bring the football down. If there was anything Marcie did not want right now, it was having her head struck by a football. But her voice died in her throat. It wasn't worth it. Peppermint Patty was already halfway across the field. Charlie knew the way to the brick wall by heart. It was the place he went to be depressed in peace. What just happened replayed over and over, each repeat making him feel worse and worse. Of everyone in the world, in their neighborhood, why him? Did she really have such a low self-image that he seemed like a viable option? Not even that. She thought he, Charlie Brown, was too good for her. He folded his arms and rested his head on top of the wall, staring off into the horizon. Linus walked up, dragging his blanket over the gravel. How are you holding up, Charlie Brown? Charlie didn't so much as glance in his direction. I don't understand anything anymore. Linus nodded sympathetically as he took his place beside Charlie. I get what you mean. It's startling when you realize you have less control over things than you think you do. When Charlie didn't interject, Linus carried on atop his soapbox. I think this may be a good thing for us. We can explore a new hobby to replace our old one. I'm considering sewing. He tossed his blanket over his shoulder. That way I can perform surgery on my blanket by myself. Good for you, Linus. Charlie wanted to be impressed, but he didn't have the energy to care. Linus scrutinized him for a moment. This isn't about baseball, is it? Charlie hesitated. He wanted to tell him. Linus usually provided some perspective, even if he wasn't ready to hear it. But Charlie doubted Marcie would appreciate being talked about behind her back. The last thing he wanted was to upset her even more. Maybe he could be vague. A girl said she likes me. He mumbled into his arm. The silence became unbearable only after a few seconds. Charlie looked up. Expecting anything was a losing strategy at this point, but he still assumed Linus would be surprised by this revelation. Linus, however, remained as composed as he had been. You don't seem happy about it. Do you not like her back? That's not the point. Charlie wasn't sure why he was getting so defensive about this. He brushed that aside before he thought about it for too long. She liked me the whole time is what I mean, and I never noticed. How could I have never noticed? It makes me feel so blind. Linus sucked his thumb as he thought through his answer. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "People only see what they are prepared to see." Huh? Charlie had no idea who Linus was quoting, nor did he find the quote itself particularly helpful. You couldn't reconcile what was right in front of you with your existing narrative about yourself, Linus explained, somehow making it even more confusing. In my opinion, it's not so surprising someone can like you. You have your faults, but we all do. You never mean anyone any harm. Charlie stifled the urge to roll his eyes. He wanted to retort, but this wasn't the hill to die on. You still don't get it. This girl thinks she can't be loved because of her glasses. I feel awful about it, Linus. It's not like she can help having them. He waited for the ball to be back in his court, but Linus was suspiciously quiet. Charlie turned to look. Linus was smiling at him. What could he have said to... Oh no. It's not who... I already figured it out, Linus cut in. I think most of the neighborhood has. Marcie's not exactly subtle. Charlie stared, mouth hung open. He whirled around, expecting a crowd to have gathered to point and laugh at him for being such a blockhead. Miraculously, no one was there. With Charlie still speechless, Linus took the opportunity to pounce. Think of it this way. Do you think Marcie's unlovable? Charlie recoiled like a fastball was coming straight for his face. What kind of a question is that? Marcie's one of the best people I know. She's very easy to talk to. She solves any problem put in front of her. She can quote a book she read months ago. Charlie couldn't stop himself from blushing. Linus was giving him that knowing smile again. So you see through Marcie's self-perception just as she sees through yours. Linus hopped down, shaking any debris he'd picked up out of his blanket. Much as I'd like to, Charlie Brown, I can't force you to do anything. But consider this. Marcie doesn't get along with most people. She prefers to stick to herself, or Peppermint Patty. He paused. But she does like you. Charlie watched in disbelief as Linus headed off down the well-trodden path away from the wall. He had to sit with what his friend had said for a minute. If he was being honest with himself, he still didn't understand what she saw in him or why she thought him a step or two above her on the ladder. Marcie had actual accomplishments, for one thing. Already his brain was flooded with the worst possible outcomes of what he was about to do. She could kick him in the shin, and he'd deserve it. Charlie shook his head. He left the wall's embrace and began his trek into the unknown anyway. He owed Marcie an apology after all. Marcie's favorite place was a small oak tree on a hill that overlooked the streets below. Only Peppermint Patty and Charles knew about it. The whole point was that it was somewhere away from everyone. It was the perfect spot to calm down after a taxing day. Today was one of those days. Peppermint Patty wouldn't be out of school for a couple more hours. That was enough time for a reset. Marcie sat down and rested her head against the trunk. She stifled a yawn. All the long hours of studying and juggling several instruments crashed back into her at once. 20 minutes, she murmured, about to drift off. A loud thunk made her shoot back up, her glasses sliding down her nose. Swiftly readjusting them, she peered down from her vantage point, but there weren't any glimpses of anyone among the trees. Must have been a hypnagogic hallucination. Increased stress and lack of sleep were both potential causes, and she was rife with both. Maybe 30. Just as her eyelids were about to close, however, a figure strode up the hill towards her. A figure with a zigzag on his yellow shirt. He stopped dead in his tracks when they made eye contact. "Hi, Marcie," Charlie Brown said with the confidence of a tissue. Marcie lifted up her glasses, squinted at the incoherent mass of colors that still included yellow, then pulled them back down. Just to be sure, she also pinched her arm. Still awake. Charles was, in fact, standing right in front of her. "Hi, Charles." She only then noticed that his nose looked a little redder than the rest of his face, which was already pretty red to begin with. "Did you run into a tree?" "Yeah, I guess I did." Silence fell over them as the only sound became the wind swishing through the leaves. Marcie minded it far less than Charlie, whose legs were trembling so much he seemed on the brink of collapse. He took a deep breath to steady his nerves, if only slightly. "I'm sorry, Marcie. About before." She perked up to show she was listening. Charlie blustered to find the right words, having not rehearsed this at all on the way here. "I wasn't really mad at you. I was, It doesn't matter. You were just trying to help." Marcie's impassive visage cracked, if only for a moment. "Thank you, Charles. I forgive you." She patted the grass beside her. "Would you like to sit with me?" Charlie gawked as if the pearly gates had opened in front of him. "But I thought this was your quiet spot." "I don't mind sharing with you." Marcie worried he was going to faint on the spot, but he somehow managed to maintain his balance. "I'm honored." he said earnestly, and slumped over on the opposite side of the tree. She was only a little disappointed. Neither said anything for a while as they listened to the breeze. If Marcie had the luxury, she took the time to get her thoughts together. "I'm sorry too, Charles." Charlie peered around the trunk at her. "What are you sorry for?" She wasn't quite sure if he was being ignorant on purpose or if he genuinely had blocked it out already. Now it felt wrong sweeping it back out from under the rug, but she may as well get it over with. "You like that little red-haired girl. I don't want to get in your way." "Oh!" Charlie had to remember that Marcie was already out of the loop on most gossip. Living on the opposite side of town meant any news wasn't likely to reach her. You didn't. She moved a few months ago." "Really?" A little excitement slipped through despite Marcie's best efforts. She hastily cleared her throat. "So it didn't work out. I guess you could say that. It wasn't really right to speculate." But Marcie still had to wonder why. All of a sudden it clicked. "You never talked to her, did you?" "Yes. I mean, no." "Why not, Charles?" Charlie sighed, resigned. "It's not love if you don't know their name, is it?" A question to a question was not what she expected. She had to ponder on her response for a few minutes. The truth may hurt his feelings, but that's what he was going to get. "When you love someone, you know them," she said at last. "You know what they like, what they don't, their failures and their successes. You know what makes them laugh, what makes them cry. If you don't know any of that, then you don't really love them. You can't. You love the idea you created in your head." She looked back to gauge his reaction. He was nodding slowly along, as though she'd affirmed something he'd been deliberating for a while. "I guess that makes sense. I think I liked the idea of starting fresh with someone. It didn't matter so much who they were, just that they wouldn't know what a disaster I am until I introduced myself. Then they'd run away." Charlie hung his head, ashamed. It wasn't fair for her, though. I hope for her sake she never noticed. Marcie scooched around the tree until Charlie was in her field of vision. "You know, Charles, I meant what I said about you being the nicest person I've ever known." Charlie looked a little startled at her suddenly being closer to him, but made no comment on it. "I don't feel very nice," he muttered. "You're honest, thoughtful, and willing to correct yourself. And you don't call anyone a lamb cake." He raised an eyebrow at her. "Lamb cake?" Marcie didn't acknowledge this. "Even if you find it difficult to believe, someone does know you and likes you as you are." It took a second for him to realize what her whole speech was really about. Everything stupid he'd ever done. Every stroke of bad luck. That didn't matter to her. He scrambled to try and reciprocate. "Well, you're, The longer he looked at her, the more tongue-tied he became. "Nice." He wanted to crawl into bed and never come out after that display. But Marcie only smiled at him. "I have an idea on how you can get your baseball field back, Charles." His cheeks returned to a more normal color now that the subject had changed. "Let's hear it. You raise money amongst yourselves and buy the lot from its current owner. Then you can do whatever you want with it, like playing baseball if you have to." Charlie took out a stray quarter from his pocket. He'd planned on exchanging it for 4 nickels from Lucy when he found the time. "That'd be a good idea if we had any. I only have $5 to my name. That is all a baseball field is truly worth." Marcie was about to clarify that she was joking, because any plot of land was worth more than $5. But Charles didn't need such reminders. He just rolled his eyes. "I didn't know you cared so much about baseball, Marcie." It was sarcastic, of course, and she would have gotten upset if it were coming from anyone else. But there was a genuine curiosity buried in his voice. Charles was always sincere, even when he wasn't trying to be. "I don't," she replied bluntly. Now he looked even more bewildered than before. Don't you play for Peppermint Patty's team?" In an impulse decision, Marcie scooched even closer, putting them both on the same side of the tree. They were close enough that she could hold his hand. She wouldn't, but she could. "If I had it my way, I wouldn't be on her team, or anyone's. I hate baseball. For some reason, Charles was passionate about baseball specifically. She checked to see if she'd offended him, but he maintained a neutral countenance. It wasn't exactly news to him. "I'm no good at sports stuff," Marcie went on. "You've probably noticed." He wisely didn't say if he did. "Nothing makes any sense, and everyone in the stands is watching you mess up." "You have people that watch your games?" Charlie interjected in awe. He subsided when Marcie gave him a look. "Consider yourself lucky you didn't, Charles. They're so invested in you winning a game for them that they'll scream at you if you don't throw the ball hard enough, or throw it to the wrong person, or if you don't catch it at all." Charlie grimaced. He was used to being grilled over the coals, though that was by his own teammates. A pang of guilt reminded him of all those times he'd yelled at Lucy for making a bad play. Marcie speaking again brought him out of his train of thought. "Might I add, if you do happen to win, that's no fun either. I just want to go home and recollect myself, but I have to stay while we get pizza or something. You never get a salad after a baseball game?" "No, I guess you don't." He treaded carefully, as this was a touchy subject. "It's not for everyone. You don't have to keep playing if you don't enjoy it. Patricia insists I do. She says it's good for me to get out." Marcie said this with air quotes. "As you can see, I don't mind being outside. Don't get me wrong, Charles. She's lots of fun, but she doesn't listen when you try to tell her something." She took a long breath. She wasn't used to talking for so long. "Everyone says the same thing. Speak up. Speak up. Why are you so quiet? It doesn't matter if you're minding your own business, but when you do speak up, nobody listens. Sometimes I wonder what the point of talking at all is if nobody ever cares about what you say." It was like the golf ball had hit Charlie in the stomach. He hadn't realized she felt this way, yet another thing that evaded his radar. He'd considered himself an outcast, but he still had people to talk to. Linus, obviously. Schroeder would lend an ear while he played the piano. Franklin, too, even if they didn't have the chance to hang out as often as either would like. Even Lucy listened, albeit it was her job as his psychiatrist. Marcie had peppermint Patty, but he knew from experience that having a vulnerable conversation with her was like lighting a match next to a firecracker. Charlie wanted to say something, anything to make her feel better, but nothing came out of his drying throat. Marcie said nothing either. She'd already said too much and upset Charles all over again. She got to her feet, wiping her glasses on her sleeve. "Sorry, Charles. I'll stop bothering you." Charlie looked on in horror as she disappeared behind the top of the hill. He sprung up and followed after her, stumbling over himself as much as his words. I don't mind if you talk." That came out worse than it sounded in his head. "I mean, you should be hurt because you have a lot to contribute." It all came gushing out now. "So what if you have glasses? You need them to see. That's all that matters. You're really smart, and you're funny, and you're kind, and you're cute." He cut himself off, but it was already too late. Marcie froze just as Charlie caught up with her. He strained to somehow dig himself out of the hole he'd created, terrified that he'd offended her. Marcie turned around with a big, giddy smile plastered on her face. Before Charlie could process that she wasn't actually mad at him, Marcie kissed him on the lips. The persistent gusts of air finally ceased, as time seemed to stop. It was Both's first real kiss with anyone. After his brain rebooted, Charlie leaned into it with no idea if he was doing it right. It lasted only about 5 seconds before Marcie pulled away, her cheeks as ablaze as Charlie's. "You're a good listener, Charles." "Thank you." Charlie stood there in a daze, the same smile spread across his own face. "I'm meeting up with Patricia after she gets out of school," Marcie continued, "and I have to finish my summer reading list, but I'm free tomorrow, so if you aren't busy with the golf ball, I'd like to see you again." It took longer than it should have for him to understand what she was talking about. Yeah, I'm not doing anything. See you around, Charles." Marcie turned on her heel, and with a spring in her step she didn't usually have, strode a short distance through the trees. Thinking he couldn't see or hear her, she let out a whoop before scampering off. Charlie finally reconnected with reality. Blinking, he felt his lips. To say this wasn't how he expected today to go would be an understatement. Charlie took the long way home. He wanted time to savor the afternoon before returning to normal life. He could have still been at the wall, paralyzed with wishy-washiness. He could have lost his nerve and turned around at the last second. He could have been stuck watching her leave more depressed than how he found her. And yet somehow he was here. Sally was pouting on the steps when he finally returned. "Where in the world have you been? You left all your junk in the yard." Charlie's smile didn't waver. "Sorry, Sal. I've been kind of busy." He pivoted to picking up his former baseball equipment. Sally rose and went to watch. From every angle, he still glowed in a way that she'd never seen from him before, definitely not in recent memory. Busy? You? You never go anywhere. How can you be busy?" He was in too good a mood to let his little sister's pestering bother him. Humming to himself, he walked through the front door and put away his cap, glove, and the golf ball back in the closet. "Until we meet again, my friends." It was bittersweet, shutting the door on them, but they deserved their rest. Sally marched over, hands on her hips. "All right, big brother, tell me what's going on. Did you stop by the ice cream truck?" She peered down in annoyance at his empty hands. "You didn't get any for me. You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Now he was being smug. Only at his highest of highs was Charlie Brown ever smug. "Oh, what's that supposed to mean? Did you—" The phone in the hallway rang, causing Charlie's grin to widen. Sally stared at him now, as if he were an alien in her brother's body. "You did, but she—" Still trying to work out how he could have possibly gone the wrong way and ended up in the right place anyway. She left him to pick up the phone. Hello? There you are, Chuck. I've been trying to reach you." His smile flipped instantly. "Is something wrong?" "I'll say it is, Chuck," crackled Peppermint Patty's voice. "I went over to Marcie's to drag her out for some football. Get the blood flowing. You know, that makes anyone feel better." Charlie detected a hint of hostility at that last part, though he couldn't imagine where it would have come from. "She wasn't interested, Chuck, and you know why?" Well, you already did it. She will not stop yapping. You should hear it for yourself, Chuck. I've never heard so much yapping in my life. She says you guys kissed." Charlie fidgeted with the phone cord. "I'm sorry. The line you are calling. You're not pulling that on me this time, Chuck. Obviously, I didn't believe her. It's out of character for you, Chuck, but she insisted I call you anyway. Is it true, Chuck?" It is, isn't it? What's going on, Chuck? Since when did you get a spine? That's what I want to know." Charlie couldn't even utter a noise, let alone a word, before Peppermint Patty plowed onward. "I've been imprisoned for one day and I'm already missing out on everything. You really are a sly dog, Chuck. This is a victory for the ugly girls." "Ow!" Charlie almost dropped the phone as it picked up some sort of kerfuffle on the other end. "Patty, she's pulling on my hair." Patty's voice was suddenly farther away. "Chuck, call her off." The phone was evidently wrestled from her as Marcie's voice rang through. "Hi, Charles." She didn't get any further before more scuffling ensued. Charlie was about to say something when Peppermint Patty mustered control over the phone again. "I'm happy for you, Chuck. Really, I am. I didn't think you had it in you. But hear this." Her tone shifted so abruptly that Charlie listened with greater intensity than he had since trying to understand the teacher from the back of social studies class. "If you break Marcie's heart, Chuck, I will come right over there and you won't like what happens. You got that? Chuck, are you still the—" The phone cut off. Charlie stood in confusion for a minute before slowly returning the receiver. Sally walked back over with an innocent smile. "Did she break up with you already?" Charlie didn't dignify that with an answer.